right. We are going to move on to our next panel, which is Prosperity Strategy Through Trade Policy. And so we have Mr. Stumo here from, where do you headquarters? Okay, Washington, the seat of power. Very good. We also have our national president here, Roger Johnson. He does stuff with trade stuff too. And so I think we'll let you go ahead first. And you can tell us a little bit about who you work for, and then you can give us the answer to our dilemma of trade. Please, I need an answer. What we have now is not working. It reminds me
Well, I grew up in Iowa on a hog farm and was a hog buyer for a while until I decided I ought to go to law school instead. And now I'm married a lady and I'm in western Massachusetts on a farm there. And homeschool our kids and we eat exclusively with wood and outdoor wood boiler. We had a lot of trees there, more than you had. Yeah.
Some red cedars you can take home.
I've got plenty. But Coalition for a Prosperous America, it has agriculture, manufacturing, and labor organization members. It was founded in 2008 when some ag folks got together and invited others to come along to Colorado Springs. Invited people from manufacturing, different manufacturing sectors, from labor, religious, environmental organizations, and because the trade thing just wasn't working for us. We were getting promised all these export opportunities, and they never really materialized to the extent of the real market share that we were giving up in our own country in a very deep, wealthy market. So the manufacturing folks said, well, that's kind of happening to us too, and labor too, and so we ended up forming the Coalition for Prosperous America that year to work to, the mission is to basically fix the trade deficit, balance trade, and get a production strategy for America. NFU is a member, Nebraska Farmers Union is a member, John Hansen sits on the board, Dan Potoff, the wife, sits on the board, and we have the chief co-chairs, the owner of Revere Copper Products, which is the oldest manufacturer in the country. Paul Revere started in 1801. We have AFL-CIO, Industrial Union Council, and the like. We are, so we represent American producers, people who make and grow things in the U.S. And what we see is in Washington, they are always promoting exports and growing exports and the like, when the issue is net exports. You export more than you import, and is that what's growing? And it's not. And when I've been to these trade negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and trade negotiators from other countries are actually carrying out a strategy. Countries like Japan, Singapore, they have strategies, and the trade negotiators are a part of their economic strategy, but they don't set it. The U.S. doesn't have a strategy. They don't even have a dumb strategy. It's not even dumb. They don't have one. It's not even a dumb one that you can improve on. It just doesn't exist. So we think that it's pretty clear that America has the tools to get to prosperity. There are some barriers we have to get out of the way. But we're going to talk about a prosperity strategy for America now. And you promised that clicker would work. Let's see. There we go. So we want to win. We need to not be afraid of winning. We need to reclaim a view of our national interests, our national economic interest, and not be afraid to do it. This growing exports, expanding two-way trade. I read the U.S. Trade Representatives talk in a July 2013 hearing, and he said, we are growing exports every year and expanding two-way trade. And it's true, it's sort of happy. You sort of expand trade just because the world grows in population. But it's the wrong metric, and it's taking us down the wrong path. We're ending up doing unilateral trade disarmament rather than reciprocal trade agreements. So we need simply to win. What was it? Vince Lombardi said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. So we hear a lot about fiscal policy these days, you know, how much we're going to spend in the government budget, and monetary policy with the QE3 and the Fed. But trade policy is more important than either of those. We cannot succeed as a country, we cannot recover from the Great Recession unless we balance trade. And it's not an opinion, it's simply math. And this is why. GDP is a measure of growth. It's a measure of the total product, gross domestic product. It's a measure of the total product produced by the U.S. It's imperfect, it's not everything, but it measures something. And you probably hear it a lot, and maybe you don't know what it is. It's really pretty simple. It's only four things, and you add them up. It's total private consumption, which is the C. It's investment in plant and equipment, investment in things that can produce other things. Business investment, that's the I. Government procurement, which is the government as consumer. And net exports. It's not growing exports, it's the extent to which exports exceed imports. So let's see what that looks like in this country. In 2011, our GDP was about 15 trillion, the total size of our economy. About 71% was consumption. That's too high proportionately because we consume more than we produce and we import the difference. We need to produce more of what we consume. That does not mean we're putting walls up. It means running the country like you should. If you're Germany, which is the biggest net exporter in the world, for reasons I won't go into, their consumption is around 62%. We should probably be around 65 or 68%. Bump up investment a little bit, which is at 13%, but the net exports is our big story. So every time you hear one of your congressmen, your governor, your president, your senators, the U.S. Trade Representative talk about increased two-way trade or growing exports, remember this number, the negative 4%. It's the net. That means our economy in 2011 was 4% smaller than it otherwise would have been in a balanced trade environment. In a year when we grew 1.8%, that's really big. Fiscal policy and monetary policy won't touch it. And that's cumulative. So the next year, 2012, we were about 4% less again after that 4% smaller of the year before, and so on. So in the last 10 years, or under Bush and Obama together, we're about approximately 15% smaller economy than we would have been as a whole in relation to a balanced trade environment, about 15% smaller than we would have been, or should have been. That's about the size of Canada's economy. So it's big. That's the supply chains, it's the employment, the jobs, the tax revenue. We wouldn't be talking fiscal cliff, we wouldn't be talking sequestration, we'd be talking other issues. So this shows the overall trade picture. We've been kind of in trouble since '74. This is the Japan Inc. days. we kind of fixed that by the Plaza Accord during the Reagan years when he made Japan revalue their yen by about 90%. We could do that because they were a military client state. China is not. Then we got into this whole free trade agreement shtick in the WTO and the rise of China, and it got ugly, really ugly. This is the biggest transfer in wealth because we ship more dollars out. It's the biggest transfer of wealth out of a country in world history. Now you hear we were always going to economists, the VSPs, the very smart people, the VSPs. They said we're maturing. We're going to go to this a service economy and a high-tech advanced manufacturing economy. That's what we're going to do, and all this other stuff, that's for those other countries to do. Well, let's just think about that. Services and advanced tech. Services, we are a net exporter of services, financial, insurance, all that sort of thing. But the power is the blue line, that's the goods, the yellow line is the net. The goods is where the power is at. Agriculture is in there, you're generally a net positive. But that's the supply chains. That's the value add all the way through the 5 or 6 steps it takes to get a product to market. What you want to do, and what a Japan or a China or Korea or Germany does, is try to get as much of that supply chain as you can. Because that's all the jobs, all the innovation, all the future innovation, all the wealth creation, all the tax revenue, and those jobs spin off other jobs, and the service sector jobs are usually the jobs that are spun off, that service those industries. So that blue line is a really big problem. Throughout that period, when we were tanking, we were growing exports the whole time, but imports grew more. So advanced tech, we were going to move to advanced tech. Well, you can see here we've been a net importer of advanced tech since 2002, so that didn't work. Why people listen to the VSPs, I don't know. Because mathematically they're wrong, they just say stuff. So you saw, I'm going to go through some ag trade figures. Those of you who saw Darrell Ray's saw a little similar, but in some ways different picture. I'll go through. Here's our net ag trade with the world, and as Darrell Ray knows and has said, this spike here is a price base, but not a volume base. So you sell the same amount or so, but the price is higher. And there's no correlation with ag trade and trade agreements, really. Not really a correlation. Let's take a look at the ag trade with free trade. We've got 20 countries that we have free trade agreements with right now. You know, that's not very impressive. And we have some negative numbers in there. Again, we have the spike. So that hasn't been really a savior. You know, the NAFTAs, the CAFTAs, the Bahrain, the Oman, the whatever trade agreements. So this is absolute value, or the volume of corn. Darrell Ray had shown you the declining U.S. share of global corn trade. That's not what this is. This is just the absolute value. But throughout all the trade agreements and the like, it's remained pretty steady. And of course, our global share has shrunk. Beans, absolute terms, they kind of went up, but global share would shrink. Wheat trended down a little bit. Live cattle, we're a net importer. There's the zero line. Beef, dead cattle, we kind of popped up over the zero line recently, but usually a net importer. Live hogs, net importer. Pork itself, we're a net exporter. Poultry has a good trend up, and the like. So that gives you just, I didn't want to spend too much time, you've already seen some of that. I want to fit it into the bigger macro picture, because It takes ag and manufacturing and labor working together on this because we just can't do it alone. And we're the only ones that are really talking the macro sense rather than an industry-specific sense. And you've got the economists that try to shut you down by saying, well, it's just Econ 101. But that's, you know, if you think a little bit, you know it's incorrect. But we are a counterweight to those economists who haven't gotten out of the David Ricardo theory of 200 years ago. Now this is an example of this doubling exports theory. I want to stamp out the growing exports rhetoric, the expanded export opportunities and the two-way trade, and I would encourage you every time that you hear a politician or a trade association or anybody say grow exports, say, I'm in favor of growing net exports. Are you?
All right.
So Obama in 2010, Obama's a problem on this too, and even in his economic speech this year, or this week, he had one line on trade. It was a trade about, you know, growing trade. During the Obama said in 2010 State of the Union speech, we're going to double exports in 5 years. How can you be against that? But the thing is, it doesn't matter. Between 2000, Bush already did that. Between 2002 and 2007, right in here, he almost doubled exports. They just grow. But in that time of doubling exports, we had the worst trade deficit ever. So it's not a lie, but the best lies have a little truth to them. So why is it that we're a persistent net importer year after year? That actually doesn't happen. It's not supposed to happen under even classical neoliberal free trade. It's supposed to be up and down, some years of surplus, some years is deficit, and it's a balance over time, over a cycle. But you have to have persistent cheating in various ways by some countries for it never to balance. That's what has to happen. You will hear news reporters say it's labor costs, it's low-cost labor. Germany is the biggest net exporter in the world in relation to their GDP. Here's Germany's hourly wage, and here's ours. We're lower. We're the China to Germany, right? Japan is about even with us, the UK. We're right in the middle of the pack, and among the developed nations, we're kind of low. Labor doesn't explain anything, and with the Asian issue, because China right now is 50% of our trade deficit, they have more labor hours than many of the products, and many of the products are high-tech, so by the time you ship them here, the shipping costs would, in a free market, have far outweighed the labor costs, so the labor cost doesn't matter, even in an item like steel. So currency is the big issue, and Farmers Union has been a leader on currency for a long time, but I view all the trade problems, this isn't scientific, but currency is what usually is supposed to adjust. If you have an export surplus, your economy does better, so your currency appreciates, making your stuff more expensive, people buy less. If you're a deficit country, you're importing too much, exporting too little, your economy isn't doing so well, but your currency declines to match the value of your economy, your stuff becomes more expensive, or cheaper rather, people buy more of it and you come back to equilibrium. That's what's supposed to happen. So currency, I view all the foreign mercantilism practices as two buckets. You've got 2 5-gallon pails here. One is only currency in it, and the other one has everything, every other practice that they do. And currency is really big. It's not the only one. So China in 1994 devalued their currency by 40%. 94. Just after the NAFTA, or right around NAFTA implementation, which is why Mexico didn't get all that maquiladora activity. They only got some. A lot of it started going to China because the next day everything Chinese went on sale by 40%. Everything economy-wide, and everything we sold to China increased in price by 40%. They pegged it, flatlined it for a while. During this period of time, they were growing by 13% per year. Free floating currency, their currency would have went up with it, but it didn't. And they did bump it up a little here, but it should have been up there. So China really was starting it, and then 19 other countries joined in. What this chart is, how they do it is governments go into foreign exchange markets, and they buy dollars to take them off the market, and they sell their own currency. So if you sell, the price goes down. You buy, the price goes up. Foreign governments have no business in foreign exchange markets. The only reason they are there, or would be there, is to manipulate the value of their currency in relation to someone else's, usually the dollar. The U.S. is the plum market. It's the biggest, wealthiest consumer market in the world. There may be a whole bunch of other people outside our country, but they live on, a lot of them, $2 a day. If you do it on a per capita or a buying power basis, that's why everyone wants our market. They don't want Bali. So what this chart shows is the blue line is the total volume of foreign government purchases in foreign exchange markets. And you can see, you remember China devalued by 40% in '94, and it had a big impact. And all of a sudden, other countries started doing competitive devaluation to match China. They're all targeting the dollar. And then during this time, as we're climbing out of the recession, the Fed is doing QE 1, 2, and 3, printing all that money, but they're voraciously buying it up. Look at this. Never before in world history has that amount of foreign government exchange rate manipulation happened. I mean, it's astounding. That's why QE3 isn't flooding the whole market with dollars, because they're vigorously stuffing it under their mattresses. And look at the close correlation with the U.S. trade deficit. And if you talk to folks who trade and manufacture here, trade commodity goods that compete in international markets directly, they know the big impact when Sweden devalues or when this country does, because then they devalue by 5, 10%, they get a 3% price benefit somehow, and it's a big bump in sales. It's huge. Everything flows. So it's a really big problem. It's not just China. Next, I'm going to talk about probably the second biggest problem, which is foreign border adjustable consumption taxes. You've probably never heard of that. You've heard of European VATs, probably a European VAT, Canada's goods and services tax. Those are taxes on consumption. You can tax 4 things. You can tax property, which you know all about. You can tax income, which you know all about. You can tax wealth, which is what estate taxation is. And you can tax consumption, which is what a retail sales tax is. We don't really tax consumption at all at the federal level, but the VAT or the GST, you tax at every level of value add throughout the supply chain. And so if you buy, if Roger sells his corn to a processor and there's a 10% tax, he collects that and remits it to the government. He doesn't actually pay it, he collects and remits. The processor sells for double to somebody else, collects 10% of that higher value, remits to the government, except deducts what he already paid to Roger. And by the end, when the time it goes to the consumer at a 10% VAT, it's 10%. The point is, the manufacturing and the service side doesn't actually pay it, they collect and remit. Now, what does that have to do with trade? When you ship your goods to a foreign country, you're paying I say it's a border adjustable consumption tax because the WTO lets you charge it at the border when you ship to Germany or China or any country that has a VAT. It kind of feels like a tariff, but it's not. It's a WTO legal charge. Average is 17%. When Germany ships to us, They rebate that VAT, so it comes out with less than 100% tax rate. So they write, if it's a Mercedes SUV or a $50,000 Mercedes car coming out of there, that's just for easy figuring. Figure Germany's almost at 20% VAT. It's a 50,000 Mercedes, they ship to the US, they write Mercedes a check for $10,000. That's a really big subsidy, okay? So it's two ways. When Ford sends its $50,000 SUV into Germany, it's got our tax load in it, and you pay $10,000 to the German government in a VAT. So it's a big subsidy and a tariff. The average around the world is 17%. Most do it. We don't, because income taxes aren't border adjustable. Retail sales taxes aren't either. It is, all the red countries have these taxes. So every red country where we ship, we pay an average 17% at their border. So we're paying for their health care, their infrastructure, their roads, their government salaries, and the like. When they ship to us, and so we pay our tax load and theirs. When they ship to us, they come into the U.S., they don't pay our tax load, they don't pay their full tax load because the consumption isn't occurring in their country, so the consumption tax is rebated, and so they get subsidized on coming to our country. This is a price differential impact. If you have a U.S. local price of $100 going into China, let's say, I think their VAT may be a little different, 17%, it comes into China at $117. China local price, product shipped to the U.S., you take off the 17% VAT because of the math, it's not $83, it's a little more, and you had an $85, $86 price coming in because of that subsidy. You can see with countries that both have VAT, it cancels out. So it's really big. In 2008, Pat Choate calculated, he's Ross Perot's 1996 running mate. He calculated with a law firm, Stewart actually, did the calculation. If you add up all the tariff assessments on our goods exports, the rebate subsidies on goods imported to the U.S. and ditto on the services, it added up to about $500 billion, which was pretty close to our trade deficit that year. There's no other trade barrier other than currency that comes close to those numbers. Maybe state-owned enterprises, China's government-owned enterprises and their subsidies. So what do? Well, you can't countervail them as an unlawful subsidy because it's WTO legal. So if we tried to do a countervailing duty, we would be in the wrong and we'd be subject to approved retaliation via the WTO. They look at the game here. When Mexico, before the NAFTA, Mexico didn't have a VAT. With the NAFTA implementation, they got a VAT at 15%. So we all reduced tariffs. That's the whole game of our unilateral trade disarmament. We all reduce tariffs and they substitute something else that we never do anything about. Mexico went to a 15% VAT, so you're not paying the same tariff, but you got a brand new VAT and you're paying their government functions. The CAFTA countries, they didn't have a border adjustable tax, any consumption tax, until we did the CAFTA agreement, and all of a sudden they had 12%. Other countries offset income, payroll, or other employer taxes. So you can lower income taxes, you can lower payroll taxes and up the VAT. So you have the same tax level in your country, but you up the price on the imports and you subsidize the exports. Some of them often do pension and healthcare reform, so you offset the private cost of healthcare or pension with a new VAT. Because you don't want to just simply increase tax. This is a very strategic thing. It's a different question than your overall level of taxation. When I talk this in Washington, they say, oh, you want a new tax. No, I want to spread the means of collecting tax in a way that makes us internationally competitive. You can decide over here the total amount of gold tax money you want to collect, but the way you collect it matters. So Germany, which I've held up as a successful producing and trading nation, has one of the biggest VATs in the world, but they lower employer taxes with it so they can up the import price and subsidize exports. So we've covered net exports as a goal, we've covered currency, and we've covered border adjustable taxes. We're going to do 2 more issues before I sum up. That's the Trans-Pacific Partnership and Fast Track. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is negotiations with 12 countries around the Pacific Rim, from Chile, Peru, to Australia, Vietnam, Singapore, all the way up to Japan and Canada and Mexico. It's 60% of global GDP among them. Some of them are currency manipulators. Since 1974, Congress, when it tells the president to negotiate trade agreements, they've always said fixed currency. The president's always ignored it, whatever president. There are currency manipulators that have they all have BATs, which we don't touch in trade negotiations. So we know that basically these days with the WTO so embedded, tariffs aren't the game anymore. They maybe should be. There's a theory that they maybe should be, but they're so low they don't even matter. These other things are what matters. I go to Washington, I tell these congressmen, I say, the tariffs don't even matter. I don't even care about tariffs. Japan is in the TPP negotiations. Their average tariff on our goods, because they're a WTO country, is 2%. But in the last year, they've devalued their currency by as much as 30%. The 2% is nothing. Let's zero out Japan's tariffs. Rah, rah, we got rid of all their tariffs. You know, some of them are more than ag goods. They do more than 2%, obviously, but on average. Who cares? They can still manipulate currency. They are now about to up their VAT from 5% to 8%, which is a 3% hike, 60% over 5, but 3% of total, which already eviscerates a 2% tariff cut. So what on the tariffs? We're giving up our sovereignty in our ability to run our own economy when we do these things. So that's part of the unilateral disarmament that we're doing, and we have done every year, and they're permanent, these agreements. Now, I call them, notice that, Trade and Global Governance Agreement. I really want you all to call them Trade and Global Governance Agreements, not trade agreements, because the minority is about trade. The minority of them are about tariffs and quotas. The rest of it, 85% of these agreements, are about global governance. They're trade and global governance agreements. 29 chapters, 5 of them are tariffs and quotas. 5 of them are. 20, that doesn't add up, does it? 5 plus 25, that's about 30 instead of 29, so this ought to be one less. That's government math. I think Michael Froman of USTR would approve. But anyway, I worked really hard on this presentation. John made me get all those ag numbers, and I'm filing through all these darn Foreign Ag Service spreadsheets and cursing him. So forgive me for being off. They're about 24. Chapters on all the other stuff. They're on intellectual property. They're on food and product safety. They're on domestic procurement, rules of origin. They're about financial regulation, the Dodd-Frank kind of stuff. They're on immigration. They're on everything that a government is supposed to do, right? Everything a domestic government is supposed to do. What a nation state is supposed to do. And they're putting it in, they're mislabeling it as a trade agreement and sending it upstairs to the international tribunals. They can overrule what these trade negotiators who are doing it in secret and won't let Congress look at the agreement unless they go into a room and don't take notes and can read it without any recording device. 2,000 pages of legal international minutia without staff. It's the only way a congressman can see it, and I'm not exaggerating. Those trade negotiators can overrule what Congress has done in the past. They could overrule, whether you like it or not, a Dodd-Frank, or this, our country of origin labeling laws, our intellectual property laws and the like, or they can put in place rules which Congress has previously considered and declined to enact. And they're permanent, so you can overrule Congress and Congress can never do anything about it again. So then it goes to international tribunals to determine any issues thereafter. This is not the U.S. court. So it is a very large swath of our nation-state government's authority that go into these. That's why we have problems with them. Now, fast track is the means by which they're trying to force this down Congress' throat. It's this thing, they call it Trade Promotion Authority. Trade Promotion, it's this happy name that's got a smiley face by it. Fast track, I just call it Trade Authority. Because trade promotion, whatever. Congress, the Founding Fathers gave Congress the authority over foreign commerce. They could have given it to the executive branch, but they didn't because the king would always try to buy off foreigners by giving away parts of the economy, and they thought it should be in the people's house. So Congress does this, has the power in the Constitution. So the fast track is all about the president taking all of that power. He gives that the fast track trade authority to fast track it, make it go really fast through Congress. They give that power to the president. It's unique. There's no other topic where they do it. Congress has the authority to do, a budget, to do all kinds of things. They don't give this authority over budget to the executive branch. So what's given up? These are all things that Congress used to do and designate specifically for the president. The choice of countries. So each one alone isn't so bad, but the package is a full divestiture. The president chooses the countries, he negotiates the full agreement. We've talked about all the broad topics in the prior slides. He negotiates on all topics, freezes out Congress through secrecy. The president signs the agreement. Congress hasn't seen it yet. The president signs it. The president drafts implementing legislation. Usually Congress does legislation, the president drafts the implementing legislation. The House has only 45 days for the committees to run through the committee process, which is really fast. So this is the first time he drafts the implementing legislation, he dumps it in Congress' lap. They've never seen it, and the public's never seen it. You got 45 days. At this point, everyone's arguing, do you like trade or do you not like trade? They're not even arguing about the provisions. Are you pro-trade or anti-trade? Well, we're pro-net exports, of course. And then after the committee, you have only 15 days for a House floor vote. You can only do 20 hours of debate. You can't do 21. You can only do 20 maximum. 21 is bad. You can't do amendments. You can't filibuster normal debate and cloture procedures. So it's a real, there's no other aspect of Congress business that they give the president the authority to do all that. So this is, we've gone through a lot. We've gone through the net exports as a strategy to win, the currency issue, the border adjustable tax issue, the TPP, and the fast track. So what do? And we want to be aggressive, we want to win, we want to have a national strategy to become a successful producing and trading nation. We don't just, free trade is not a goal, it ends up to be unilateral free trade, but it was never a goal, it was implicitly a means to an end, which is bettering the quality of life for people in this country. That's the goal. National priority of net exports, that's your quick response. Pro-export, I'm pro-net export. Remember that. Currency, these bills, I know NFU supports them and Nebraska Farmers Union supports them. They're pretty good bills to remedy currency manipulation, but what's new is we need to have all our international trade agreements include an effective currency regime within them, so they can't nullify the expected benefits of the agreement via currency manipulation. We actually have some brand new friends on this. We think we have the win behind us on TPP and fast track because of currency, because the auto industry is very strong on the currency issue, which is a new friend for us. And some of the prior the globalist crowd actually is very concerned about global currency manipulation, breaking down the international monetary system. They want it fixed. So that actually outweighs their desire for new trade agreements, so they're now our friends. So the pro-TPP crowd is shrinking right now. The border adjustable tax issue, that's something that that is really important. It's an immature proposal right now, but you want to offset other taxes in the U.S. And so everyone's held basically harmless, so you have the same tax collection in the country, but then you get every Chinese container ship to pay U.S. taxes, just as every U.S. container ship to China pays their taxes. 1/5 of China's federal government budget comes from border taxes. 1/5, $1 out of $5. It's really big. Oppose TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, and oppose fast track. And these are looking pretty good right now. We just saw an article in Bloomberg and the New York Times today that the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee chair, those two chairmen, they want to come out with a fast track bill here pretty quick. They call it TPA, TPP, TPA. TPA is Trade Promotion Authority, that's fast track. TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. Even I get confused. We'll see. We've got some real big opposition, and actually on fast track, the Tea Party has been helpful because they are very pro-Constitution, and they don't like Obama. So the idea of the Congress giving all its power to Obama is wrong because the Founding Fathers didn't do it that way, and because Obama shouldn't have it. So they're actually being helpful in this regard. And we'll get them on the globalism of the TPP, and they're starting to figure that out too. So they're interesting new allies of ours, in addition to the auto industry and the globalist crowd. So, now that your head hurts, this whole slideshow, I put it up on Trade Reform, which is our trade blog. And, by the way, if you want to buy American for Christmas, you can go to our Buy American store right there. Thank you.
Questions? I'm sure you don't have it.
Right here.
John Dietrich and then we're here.
Michael, we're reading quite a bit, I'm reading quite a bit about some positive developments in manufacturing and some reshoring because of, partially because of natural gas and reducing competitive energy costs, partially because of seeing some rising wages in China and some other things that what does CPA think of that? I know it's not going where we want it to go, but I'm just curious what CPA's opinion is on that.
Some is happening, but we don't have a net reshoring yet. So just like the trade, we'd like the net.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you see, is the trend actually as positive as what I hear?
I think our view is it's overblown. It's sort of this green shoots doesn't make a trend, a national trend. The anecdotes aren't quite there in the statistics yet. And the interesting thing in manufacturing is that if you think you've got design, engineering, and manufacturing, in a supply chain, and they kept saying, well, we send the manufacturing overseas, but we keep the design and engineering. Well, first, the manufacturing is 90% of the jobs. Secondly, so you only got 10% left of those jobs anyway. Secondly, the design and engineering have to follow. They eventually go where the manufacturing is because that's what it's got to have. You can't do it all on Skype. And so that's why you're seeing the design and engineering go offshore too. But there is some reshoring. The energy thing is significant. We're not as energy intensive as we were in the 70s and prior, so our amount of energy necessary per GDP isn't as big a percentage as it was, which is good. But the energy helps, certainly.
One last little question. What's your opinion of why it continues the free trade, agenda, which we've all been fighting for years, why it keeps moving forward regardless of administration? Basically it started, in my view, during the Reagan administration. Clinton didn't slow it up, embraced it. George Bush, continued it, very small resistance in the Obama administration. What invisible hand keeps it going?
I viewed
Can you
it.
repeat the question, because I don't think people were here.
Question is
And
what-
John Diedrich didn't go to the mic even though he should have, and he knows he should set an example.
I know better.
But can you repeat the
John-
question, so
John-
those folks who are doing a good job can know.
Paraphrasing, free trade is so stupid, why does it keep going?
Against all the evidence to the contrary.
Right, yeah. They call it the Washington Consensus. There's this Washington Consensus on this free trade benefiting all, and it's a three-legged stool, and I think it really goes back to World War II. That's when the Bretton Woods system and the Marshall Plan and the GATT arose, the WTO and the World Bank. But the three legs of the stool in modern days are this. First is the academics, the academic economists who are only taught David Ricardo's free trade. You may have heard 200 years ago, David Ricardo was a financial guy, and he wrote about how if England is raising sheep and wool and isn't so good at wine, but Portugal is good at wine, not so good at sheep and wool because of terrain and climate and the like, they're better off if England makes the sheep and wool and the Portuguese make the wine and then they trade. Because of comparative advantage. England has a comparative advantage in one and Portugal has a comparative advantage in the other. Of course, you had no capital mobility, you couldn't move plants around, those were fixed factors of production, they were climate, land, weather, and the like, and labor wasn't mobile. So in a simple kindergarten Lego block environment, that's true. Now when you have capital can go anywhere to put up a plant and build it quick and build economies of scale and scope and get innovation and intellectual property advantages. You have multiple equilibriums, an astounding number in each market. So there's multiple, comparative advantage things, but comparative advantage can change due to government policies or who gets there first, or who plows a bunch of money in, or who manipulates the currency, or who gets the tax system in. So the climate can be messed with by the government. So nothing about what David Ricardo said matters anymore because all his assumptions don't exist. That's the academic side. There's the multinational corporation side, which likes to arbitrage the low-price jurisdictions to procure the cheapest goods and bring them in to beat out the domestic competition. There's the diplomats who like to use trade agreements as foreign policy to buy friends by giving up pieces of our economy. And that's a powerful bunch, too. So that's the whole TPP thing, is its pivot from the Middle East, the pivot to China to kind of, it's not isolation of China, but it kind of is a little bit, at least it's a counterweight to China, so it's a very diplomat-driven thing. So those are the three legs.
I've served as a top security clearance rated trade advisor in 3 administrations. I think the simple answer is that the money behind the process has a vested interest in being able to develop and implement rules that work to their company advantage, and that their company advantage and company interest supersedes the interests of the country time after time after time, and that those are the folks who have the pop in the back, those are the folks who have the influence, those are the folks who have the expertise, those are the folks who have the vested interest, and so those are the folks who are going to employ our current trade advisors, or trade staff. And so if they want to be able to leave public service and go to the private sector and make serious money, those are the folks that they go work for. So in the case of USTR and that whole trade system that we have in place, we do not have a revolving door because too many people were getting jammed up going through the revolving door. So we now have a moving walkway that goes directly from government to private sector, back and forth seamlessly. And so we see junior folks in the trade system consistently negotiating agreements that work to certain companies' advantage based on their international interests, and those folks then go to work directly for those companies after the trade negotiations are concluded. And so we do this over and over again, and those folks are in a competition with some of the brightest, most selfish, senior, ruthless trade negotiators in the world who actually really do a good job of protecting their country's interests. It's not a fair competition between equals at all. I mean, those guys are kicking our tail, and they don't do it by accident. Those guys are really, really good at what they do. And our guys, we don't have a comparable amount of even technical staff to be able to, in my opinion, hold our own with what we're up against. And the money and the power in the system tilts the floor, and it all moves in the direction of the economic interest.
And it just seems like it creates an invisible hand that Adam Smith talked about, kind of the author of Capitalism, talked about the invisible hand in the marketplace, which is supply and demand. We have an invisible hand that's the sum of what you two talked about, that keeps moving this process forward. It's discouraging.
Except when you get on the inside, it's not so visible. It's not invisible at all. Remember that TV ad where the folks are on the airplane and somebody starts to, everybody's talking, and all of a sudden somebody starts to talk and everybody else stops because when E.F. Hutton talks, everybody listens. That's the way the trade advisory system works. So if you really want to get down to it, when push comes to shove, that's the way the deal works. When I served on the APAC, I had raised questions about why it is that the USTR wasn't even sending staff to a regional ministerial, and instead we had the head of the APAC, who just happened to be the CEO of Cargill, represent our U.S. interests. Ain't nothing invisible about that. So did he represent his company interests, who operate in 57 countries of the world, or did he represent our country interests? Even though it might have worked against his own company advantage or interests at the time. So our system is completely plugged up with that whole kind of advisory system, which is dominated by large interests. And we have a Congress who won't stand up on its own back legs and protect its own interests or respect and implement its own sovereign responsibilities. And did you mention the fact that I'm on your board of directors?
He did.
I just wanted to make sure that I suffer through an awful lot of conference calls on your behalf for the good of the whole. And they'll give Farmers Union conference calls a run for the money, I'll tell you. And this guy does a terrific job of helping make complicated things simple and keeping all of the different folks who are in our broad-based coalition working together and moving forward. He does an outstanding job, and we're really grateful that you're here today. Thank you.
It's like presenting over a Star Wars varsity.